The Friday evening rush at Romano's Italian restaurant was in full swing. The dining room buzzed with conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, and the soft classical music playing through the overhead speakers. Among the chaos moved a woman in her early 40s, carrying plates with the practiced ease of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Her name was Claire, and she had been waiting tables here for almost 4 years now. She wore the standard black uniform that all the servers did, her hair pulled back neatly, comfortable shoes that had seen better days. To most of the customers who came through those doors, she was practically invisible. Just another face bringing food from the kitchen to their tables. Just another person doing a job. But Claire hadn't always been just a waitress, though you wouldn't know it by looking at her now, moving efficiently between tables with her notepad and pen. Life had a way of changing plans, of taking dreams and putting them on a shelf somewhere high up where you couldn't quite reach them anymore. Every Friday and Saturday night, Romano's featured live piano music in the lounge area. A rotating roster of local musicians would come in and play for a few hours while guests enjoyed their meals and drinks. Claire always found reasons to pass by the lounge during her shifts. Sometimes she would pause in the doorway just for a moment, watching whoever was playing that night. Her fingers would move slightly at her sides, following along with the melody in a way she didn't even realize she was doing anymore. Music had been everything to her once. From the time she was 7 years old and her grandmother had taught her the first few notes on an old upright piano, she had been hooked. By high school, she was winning competitions. By 19, she had earned a full scholarship to study at the Sterling Conservatory, one of the best music schools in the state. Her teachers had called her gifted. Some had even used the word prodigy, though she had always felt embarrassed by that. Then life happened, as it often does. Her father got sick. The medical bills piled up faster than anyone could have imagined. Her younger brother was still in high school and needed support. Her mother was overwhelmed, trying to work 2 jobs and care for her husband at the same time. Claire had made the decision without really thinking about it. She left school, came home, and found work. First at a diner, then at a department store, and finally here at Romano's, where the tips were better and the schedule was reliable. That had been 12 years ago. Her father had recovered, thankfully. Her brother had finished school and moved across the country for a good job. Her mother had retired and was doing well. And Claire was still here, still serving tables, still watching piano players from doorways. She didn't regret the choices she had made. Family came first always. But sometimes, late at night when the restaurant was quiet and she was wiping down tables, she would let herself remember what it felt like to play. Really play. Not just tapping out melodies on a counter when no one was looking, but losing herself completely in the music. Tonight was going to be different, though she didn't know it yet. Tonight there was a private party booked in the main dining room. A group of about 15 people, all dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. They worked in finance, something to do with investments and hedge funds. Claire didn't fully understand what they did, but she understood that they had money and they wanted everyone to know it. From the moment they arrived, they were loud. Not in a fun, celebratory way, but in that particular manner that comes from people who are used to being the most important ones in any room. They snapped their fingers for service. They spoke over each other, trying to tell bigger stories and make more impressive jokes. They barely glanced at Claire or the other servers except to point at empty glasses or complain about minor things. Claire had dealt with difficult customers before. You learned quickly in this job not to take things personally. Smile, be professional, do your work, collect your tip, move on. That was the formula. But this group had a particular edge to them, a meanness that felt deliberate rather than thoughtless. The man hosting the party, a tall guy with perfectly styled hair and a watch that probably cost more than Claire's car, seemed to be the worst of them. He made a big show of everything, sending back wine because it wasn't the right temperature, questioning the chef's choice of garnish on a dish, making comments about the restaurant's decor just loud enough for the staff to hear, but pretending he was just talking to his friends. At one point, Claire was serving drinks to the table when her sleeve accidentally brushed against his jacket. Just the lightest touch as she reached across to place a glass in front of the woman next to him. He jerked back as if she had spilled something on him even though she hadn't. "Careful there," he said loudly, glancing around at his colleagues with a smirk. "We don't want the help getting too comfortable, do we? This is our money, not a dish towel." The table erupted in laughter, Not genuine laughter, but that performative kind where everyone wants to show they're in on the joke. Claire felt her face flush hot, but she kept her expression neutral. "My apologies, sir. Can I get you anything else?" He waved her away dismissively, already turning back to his conversation as if she had ceased to exist the moment she stopped being useful. Claire walked back toward the kitchen, keeping her breathing steady, her steps measured. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. Just do your job. In the kitchen, she stood for a moment with her back against the cool wall. Antonio, one of the line cooks who had worked here even longer than she had, caught her eye. He didn't say anything, just gave her a slight nod. He had seen it all too. They all had. It was part of the job. She could hear the piano player for the private party arriving. They had hired someone special for their event, different from the regular weekend performers. Through the kitchen doors, she could see him setting up. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a tuxedo that looked rented. Even from a distance, something seemed off about him. The way he moved, a little unsteady. The way he sat down at the bench heavily, like he wasn't quite sure where it was. Romano, the owner and manager, noticed too. She saw him frown and start walking toward the piano. But before he could get there, the young man began to play. Or tried to. His fingers fumbled over the keys, missing notes, losing the rhythm. It was supposed to be Chopin. Claire could tell that much, but it came out garbled and confused. The private party started noticing. Conversations paused. People turned to look. And then the whispers started, followed by barely concealed laughter. The piano player stopped, started again, stopped. His face was red. He was clearly struggling, clearly not in any condition to be performing. Claire watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart sinking. She knew that feeling. That horrible exposure of failing publicly at something you're supposed to know how to do. She almost felt sorry for him, despite the disaster he was creating. Almost wanted to look away to give him some dignity, but she couldn't look away. Because she knew something that nobody else in that room knew. She knew exactly what those pieces should sound like. She knew every note, every chord, every subtle dynamic. She had played them herself years ago in concerts and competitions. Her fingers remembered them even if she hadn't touched a real piano in over a decade. And something in her chest, something that had been quiet for a very long time, suddenly began to wake up. The piano player finally gave up. After stumbling through another few painful measures, he simply stopped, his hands dropping into his lap. Even from the kitchen, Claire could see his shoulders slumped in defeat. The dining room had gone awkwardly silent, that terrible quiet that follows a public failure. Romano hurried over to the young man, speaking to him in low, urgent tones. The piano player stood up, unsteady on his feet, and Romano guided him toward the back exit. It was clear now to everyone what the problem was. The guy had shown up drunk, or maybe he had been drinking before the performance. Either way, the private party's entertainment had just walked out the door. The host of the party, the man with the expensive watch and the Armani jacket, stood up from his seat. His face was red. Whether from anger or the wine he had been drinking, Claire couldn't tell. Probably both. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he announced to the room, though mainly to his group. "I paid good money for this evening." Professional entertainment was part of the package. And what do we get? Some amateur who can barely find middle C. His friends murmured in agreement, shaking their heads. One woman in a silk dress added, "Honestly, Richard, you should demand a refund from whoever booked him." Richard. So that was his name. Claire watched as he paced near his table, clearly enjoying the attention, the opportunity to make a scene. Romano had returned from escorting the piano player out and was now trying to smooth things over, offering complimentary drinks, desserts, anything to calm the situation. But Richard wasn't interested in being calmed down. He was on a roll now and his audience was eating it up. "You know what the real problem is?" he said, his voice carrying across the entire dining room. "Nobody takes pride in their work anymore. Nobody has any actual talent or dedication. It's all just mediocrity, everywhere you look." He gestured broadly around the restaurant and his eyes landed on the regular piano in the lounge area, the one that sat silent during private events. "We're in a restaurant that has 2 pianos and nobody here can play one properly. What does that say about society today?" Claire was refilling water glasses at a nearby table, trying to stay invisible, trying to just get through the rest of her shift. But she could feel something building inside her, a pressure that had been accumulating for years, maybe. Every time she had walked past a piano without touching it. Every time she had heard music and felt her fingers ache to play. Every time someone had looked through her instead of at her. "What about you?" Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up and realized with a sinking feeling that he was pointing directly at her. "You with the water pitcher. Can you play piano, or are you only qualified to carry things?" His table erupted in laughter. The same fake, performative laughter from before. Claire stood frozen, the water pitcher still in her hand. Every eye in the dining room was on her now. "Oh, Richard, stop it," one of his friends said through his laughter. "What are you doing?" "I'm serious," Richard continued, clearly emboldened by the attention. "Does anyone in this entire establishment have any actual talent? Or are we all just pretending?" He looked at Claire with exaggerated expectation, his eyebrows raised. "Well, don't be shy. Can you play or no?" Claire's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands trembled slightly, and she set the water pitcher down on the nearby table before she dropped it. Every instinct told her to just apologize, to deflect, to disappear back into the kitchen where she belonged. But something else was rising up in her. Something that had been buried for too long. She thought about her grandmother teaching her those first notes. She thought about her music theory professor who had told her she had something special, a gift that shouldn't be wasted. She thought about all the years she had spent being practical, being responsible, being invisible. Romano caught her eye from across the room. He was standing near the bar watching the whole scene unfold. They had worked together for 4 years, but Claire realized she had never really told him about her past. She had mentioned once, months ago, that she used to play a little. He had asked about it, seemed interested, but she had changed the subject quickly. It felt too painful to talk about back then. Now, though, Romano's expression was different. There was something in his eyes. Not pity, not curiosity. It was almost like permission. Like he was telling her without words that whatever she decided to do next was entirely up to her. The dining room was waiting. Richard stood with his arms crossed, a smug smile on his face, certain that he had made his point. That the waitress would stammer out some excuse, that everyone would laugh, that he would win this little game he was playing. Claire took a breath. Then another. Her voice when she spoke was quieter than she intended, but it was steady. "Actually," she said, "I can play." The laughter died instantly. Richard's smile faltered for just a second before returning, more condescending than before. "Oh, wonderful," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "By all means, please. Entertain us. Play something simple, though. Nothing too complicated. Maybe Mary Had a Little Lamb or something on that level." More laughter from his table, though it sounded more nervous now. People in other parts of the restaurant were turning to watch. The staff had started emerging from the kitchen, sensing that something unusual was happening. Claire walked toward the piano in the lounge. It was only about 20 feet away, but it felt like miles. Each step felt surreal, like she was walking through a dream. Or maybe waking up from one. She had spent so long being one person, playing one role, that she had almost forgotten there was another version of herself, a version that existed before the bills and the responsibilities and the years of just getting by. She reached the piano bench and sat down. The leather was cool beneath her, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. She adjusted the bench slightly, moving it to exactly the right distance from the keys, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment doubt crashed over her like a wave. What if she had forgotten? What if 12 years away had eroded the skills she once had? What if her fingers didn't remember what her mind did? She would humiliate herself in front of everyone, prove Richard right, become a joke instead of just invisible. But then her fingers touched the keys and something clicked into place. The smooth ivory felt like coming home. She closed her eyes for just a moment, letting herself remember not just how to play, but why she had loved it. Music wasn't just notes on a page. It was truth. It was emotion made tangible. It was the closest thing she had ever found to pure expression. She opened her eyes and looked out at the dining room. At Richard with his smug expression. At his friends waiting to laugh. At Romano watching intently from the bar. At her fellow servers clustered near the kitchen door. At all the other diners who had paused their meals to see what would happen next. And then Claire began to play. She chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because it was one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, and because it matched exactly how she felt in that moment. Powerful, furious, beautiful, unstoppable. The opening notes crashed through the restaurant like a thunderstorm, loud and commanding and impossible to ignore. Her right hand flew up the keyboard while her left hand pounded out the deep, resonating bass notes. The piece was aggressive, almost violent in its intensity, and Claire poured everything into it. Every year of silence, every moment of being overlooked, every dream she had carefully folded up and put away. The transformation in the room was instant. Richard's smile vanished completely. His mouth actually fell open, his eyes wide. His friend's laughter cut off mid-sound, replaced by absolute shock. People at other tables stopped eating, forks frozen halfway to mouths. The staff stood transfixed. Claire's fingers raced across the keys with precision that came from years of rigorous training. The complicated runs, the dramatic chords, the subtle dynamics that made the piece come alive, all of it flowed from her as naturally as breathing. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly, her face intense with concentration and emotion. This wasn't just playing. This was proof. This was power. This was a woman reminding the world and herself that she was so much more than anyone had bothered to notice. The music filled every corner of the restaurant, impossible to escape, impossible to ignore. Claire's hands moved across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. The Rachmaninoff piece was relentless, demanding, unforgiving of any mistake. And she was playing it flawlessly. In the kitchen, the line cooks had stopped working. Antonio stood with a pan still in his hand, sauce dripping forgotten onto the floor. The dishwasher had turned off the water. Everyone was listening, watching through the service window with expressions of complete disbelief. At Richard's table, the transformation was almost comical. The man who had been so confident moments ago now looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. His face had gone pale, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to name. The woman in the silk dress had her hand over her mouth. Another man had actually stood up from his chair, leaning forward as if he needed to get closer to believe what he was hearing. Other diners throughout the restaurant were reacting too. An elderly couple near the window had turned their chairs completely around to face the piano. A family with 2 teenage kids had abandoned their desserts. People were pulling out their phones, and Claire could see the little red recording lights appearing around the room like fireflies, but she barely noticed any of it. When she really played, the rest of the world disappeared. There was only the music, only the conversation between her hands and the keys, only the story she was telling through sound. The Rachmaninoff piece told a story of struggle and triumph, of darkness and light, of something powerful trying to break free. Right now it felt like her own autobiography. Her fingers flew through a particularly difficult passage, a cascade of notes that required perfect coordination between both hands. She had practiced this section hundreds of times as a student, until her fingers ached and her back was sore from sitting. Now all those hours of practice lived in her muscle memory, and her hands knew exactly where to go. The piece built to its first dramatic climax, the bass notes thundering beneath soaring melody lines. Claire's whole body was engaged now, leaning into the forceful sections, pulling back for the quieter moments. This was what people didn't understand about classical piano unless they had done it themselves. It wasn't just your fingers. It was your entire being, your breath, your heartbeat, your soul. As she moved into the middle section of the piece, something interesting started happening. More people were appearing. Customers from the bar area had wandered over. A couple who had been waiting for their table in the lobby had come inside. Even Romano's wife, who normally stayed in the back office doing paperwork, had emerged to see what was causing such a commotion. Richard had finally sat back down, but he looked nothing like the confident, mocking man from before. He had pulled out his phone and was typing frantically, his expression confused and almost frightened. The woman next to him leaned over to see what he was looking at, and her eyes went wide. She whispered something to the person next to her, who pulled out their phone too. But Claire was approaching the final section of the piece now, and it demanded all of her attention. This was the part that separated the good pianists from the great ones. The part where your hands had to maintain perfect independence while playing at maximum intensity. The part where one tiny mistake would cascade into disaster. She didn't make any mistakes. Her hands were sure, her timing perfect, her dynamics exactly right. The music built and built, growing more powerful, more urgent, until finally it crashed into the final massive chords. Claire's hands came down on the keys with controlled force, letting the sound ring out into the dining room. Then silence. The final notes faded away, and for a long moment nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence stretched out for 3 seconds, 4 or 5. Claire's hands still rested on the keys, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She had forgotten how much energy it took to play something like that, how much it demanded from you. Then the applause started. It began with Romano, who began clapping slowly, deliberately, his face showing something like wonder. Then the elderly couple joined in. Then the family with teenagers. Then it spread like wildfire through the entire restaurant. Within seconds, everyone was applauding, and not the polite golf clap of people being polite. This was real applause, enthusiastic and genuine. People were standing up. The 2 servers who had been watching from the kitchen doorway were clapping so hard their hands had to hurt. Even some of Richard's own party were on their feet, looking stunned but unable to deny what they had just witnessed. But Claire wasn't finished. She had spent 12 years being quiet, being small, being forgettable. Tonight she had something to say, and one piece wasn't enough. While people were still applauding, she transitioned seamlessly into her next choice. Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. If the Rachmaninoff had been about power and drama, this piece was about joy, about the way classical music and jazz could dance together, about the energy of a city, the rhythm of life, the unexpected beauty in everyday moments. Her fingers found the famous opening clarinet glissando translated to piano, that sliding, bluesy phrase that everyone recognized even if they didn't know the name. The applause faded as people realized she was playing again. They sat back down, but nobody looked away. Nobody even thought about going back to their meals. This was the kind of moment you didn't interrupt. Claire smiled as she played, actually smiled for the first time that entire evening. This piece was different from the Rachmaninoff. It had humor in it, personality, a kind of playfulness. Her left hand bounced through stride piano rhythms while her right hand played melody lines that swooped and soared. The piece moved between classical precision and jazz improvisation, and Claire handled both with equal skill. Richard was still staring at his phone, and now he looked genuinely distressed. He showed the screen to the woman next to him, then to another colleague. Claire could see them reading something, their expressions changing from confusion to shock to something that might have been embarrassment. The music moved into its famous slower section, the part that felt like a love song to a city at night. Claire let the notes breathe here, gave each phrase space to land. Some pieces you had to attack, others you had to seduce. Gershwin needed both, and you had to know when to do which. Antonio had come out of the kitchen entirely now, still wearing his apron, standing against the wall with tears actually running down his cheeks. He had worked in restaurants for 30 years and thought he had seen everything. But this was something else entirely. The teenage girl from the family near the front pulled out her phone and started recording. Her brother elbowed her, whispered something that looked like already doing it. Their parents didn't even try to stop them. Some moments needed to be captured. Some moments were too important to let disappear. Claire moved into the final section of the Rhapsody, where all the themes came back together in a glorious rush. The piece built energy like a train gathering speed, faster and more intense until it finally exploded into its triumphant ending. Her hands flew across the keys one last time, hitting the final crashing chords with perfect timing. This time when she finished, she lifted her hands from the keys and let out a long breath. Her shoulders dropped, and only then did she fully register where she was and what had just happened. The restaurant had transformed. Everyone was standing. The applause was louder than before, almost deafening. People were actually cheering. Claire stood up from the piano bench, her legs a little shaky. She looked around at all the faces staring at her. At Romano, who was beaming with pride like a father at his daughter's wedding. At her fellow servers, who looked like they were seeing her for the first time. At the other diners, many of them with phones out, some with tears in their eyes. And at Richard's table, where the energy had completely changed. The smugness was gone. The mockery had evaporated. Richard himself was standing, but he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His face was ashen. The phone in his hand trembled slightly. He took a step toward Claire and the room quieted down, everyone sensing that something important was about to happen. When he spoke, his voice was nothing like before. The arrogance had drained away, leaving something raw and uncomfortable behind. "You're Claire Bennett," he said. It wasn't a question. "I just found the articles." "The videos from years ago. You won the International Young Performers Competition. You were supposed to be the next big thing. There are forum posts from music students asking what happened to you, why you disappeared." Claire stood very still, processing his words. She had never looked herself up online, never wanted to see what people might have said about her leaving. It had been easier to just move forward, to not look back. Claire looked at Richard, really looked at him for the first time that evening. The man who had mocked her, who had treated her like she was less than human just 30 minutes ago, now stood before her looking completely undone. His expensive watch caught the light as his hand shook slightly, still holding his phone. "That was a long time ago," Claire said quietly. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt like she was standing on the edge of something. Talking about this part of her life, the part she had carefully locked away, felt dangerous. Like opening a door she had nailed shut. Richard swallowed hard. "The competition was 15 years ago. You were 19. The judges said you had the most natural talent they had seen in a decade. There are videos of your performance, over 2 million views on one of them." He looked down at his phone, then back up at her. "And then you just vanished. No more competitions, no recordings, no concert tours. It's like you disappeared off the face of the earth." The restaurant was silent. Everyone was listening now, not just to what was being said, but to what wasn't being said, the story behind the story. Romano had moved closer, his expression concerned, protective even. He looked ready to step in if Claire needed him to. "I didn't disappear," Claire said. She was aware of all the eyes on her, all the phones probably still recording. But something had shifted inside her during those 2 performances. Something that had been locked down for too long had broken free. And now that it was out, she couldn't put it back, didn't want to put it back. "Life happened," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "My father got sick, cancer, stage 3. The treatments were expensive, and they weren't all covered by insurance. My family needed help. My little brother was still in high school. My mom was drowning trying to keep everything together." She paused, surprised by how much the memories still hurt even after all these years. "So I came home. I left the conservatory, left my scholarship, left everything I'd been working toward. Because that's what you do when your family needs you. You show up, you help, you do what needs to be done." Richard's colleague, the woman in the silk dress, had tears running down her face. She wasn't the only one. The elderly couple near the window were holding hands, both of them visibly moved. The teenage girl who had been recording had lowered her phone, just watching now with wide eyes. "I got a job," Claire continued. "Then another job. Then I ended up here. And it's been good, honestly. My dad recovered, thank God. He's been in remission for 8 years now. My brother graduated college, has a great job in California. My mom retired last year and spends her time gardening and spoiling her grandkids. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. But your music," Richard said, and there was something in his voice that might have been genuine regret. "Your gift. You gave it all up," Claire shook her head. "I didn't give it up. I just put it away for a while. There's a difference. Music isn't just about performing on stage or winning competitions or making recordings. Music is something you carry inside you. It doesn't leave just because you stop playing publicly." She gestured around the restaurant. "I've listened to every pianist who has played here over the years. I hum while I work. I tap out rhythms on tables when I'm clearing them. I still hear music everywhere in everything. That never went away. It just lived quieter." Antonio stepped forward from where he had been standing against the wall. 4 years I work with you," he said, his accent thick with emotion. 4 years and you never say nothing about this. Nothing." Claire smiled at him, a real smile. "Would it have changed anything? Would it have made the job any easier? Would it have made the customers nicer or the tips bigger?" She shrugged. "I learned a long time ago that people see what they want to see. If you're wearing a uniform and carrying plates, that's all most people will ever notice." That landed hard. Claire could see it in the faces around her, especially at Richard's table. The discomfort was palpable. These were people who prided themselves on being smart, on being able to read situations, on being better than everyone else. And a waitress had just schooled them on their own blind spots. Richard cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." The words came out stiff, unpracticed. This was clearly not something he did often. "What I said earlier, the way I treated you, it was completely out of line. I was rude and disrespectful and honestly just cruel. There's no excuse for it. You're right, Claire said simply. There isn't. The bluntness of her response seemed to surprise him. He had probably expected her to be gracious, to brush it off, to make it easier for him. But Claire had spent 12 years making things easier for people like him, and she was done with that. But here's the thing, she continued. You didn't just apologize because you found out I used to be somebody. You apologized because I proved I had value in a way you could understand. And that's the problem, isn't it? People shouldn't have to prove their worth. Everyone has a story. Everyone has depth. Everyone deserves basic respect. She looked around the room, making eye contact with different people. How many times do we look right through someone because of their job, their appearance, their circumstances? How many times do we make assumptions about who matters and who doesn't? Tonight I had something to prove, and I could prove it. But what about all the people who can't? Who don't have some hidden talent or impressive past to pull out? Do they deserve any less dignity? The silence in the restaurant had changed. It wasn't the shocked silence of people watching a spectacle anymore. It was something heavier, more thoughtful, uncomfortable in the way that real truth often is. Romano spoke up for the first time, his voice thick with emotion. Claire, I had no idea. If I had known, I would have. We could have. He trailed off, not quite sure what he was trying to say. Would have what? Claire asked gently. Given me special treatment? That's not what I wanted. I needed a job with steady pay and good tips. You gave me that. You've always been fair, always been kind. That's all anyone should ask for. Richard was still standing there, looking lost. His friends had started sitting back down, clearly ready for this evening to be over. The party that had started with such arrogance and swagger was ending with a lesson none of them had expected. The question is, what happens now? Claire said. And she wasn't entirely sure if she was talking to Richard or to herself or to the whole room. Do we all go back to how things were? Pretend this didn't happen? Or does something actually change? Before anyone could answer, Romano made a decision. Claire could see it happen on his face, the way his expression shifted from shock to determination. Claire, he said, how would you feel about playing here? Regularly, Not as part of your server duties, but as our featured pianist. We could arrange your schedule. You could still wait tables if you wanted, but mainly you would play. Claire blinked, genuinely surprised. Romano, I'm serious, he cut her off. We've been looking for a permanent piano player for months. Nobody has been quite right. But what you just did, that was extraordinary. People would come just to hear you play. I know they would. The teenage girl who had been recording earlier spoke up, her voice excited. It's already happening. I posted the video to my account, and it's already got like 5,000 views. And my friend posted one too. People are sharing them everywhere. Her mother nodded. She's right. This is going to spread fast. What you did tonight, it's the kind of thing people talk about. The kind of thing that goes viral. Claire felt dizzy. Everything was moving too fast. 20 minutes ago, she had been a waitress trying to get through her shift. Now people were talking about viral videos and job offers, and complete strangers were invested in her story. Richard stepped forward again, and this time his expression was different. More genuine, less performative. I meant what I said about the apology. But words aren't enough, are they? I'd like to do something more meaningful. He paused, thinking. My firm handles charitable giving. What if we set up a fund? A scholarship program for talented musicians who can't afford to pursue their education? Kids who might otherwise have to make the choice you did. Claire stared at him. Of all the things she had expected tonight, this wasn't one of them. You're serious? Completely serious, Richard said. We could call it the Bennett Music Scholarship. Help kids who have the talent but not the resources. Make sure they don't have to choose between their dreams and their families. Around the restaurant, people were nodding. The idea was taking hold, spreading through the crowd like the music had earlier. Someone called out that they would donate. Someone else said their company might sponsor it. The energy in the room had transformed completely from where it started. Claire woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. Text messages, missed calls, notifications flooding in from social media platforms she barely used. She sat up in bed, confused and still half asleep, scrolling through message after message from people she hadn't talked to in years. Her old roommate from the conservatory had sent a video link with 3 exclamation points. Her high school music teacher had called twice. Even her brother in California had texted at 3 a.m. his time. Just a string of shocked emojis and the words, Claire, what is happening? She clicked on the video link her roommate had sent. It was her performance from last night recorded on someone's phone. The angle was a bit shaky and the sound wasn't perfect, but there she was playing the Rachmaninoff at Romano's restaurant. The video had been posted just 8 hours ago and already had over 3 million views. The comments section was overwhelming. Thousands of people weighing in, sharing the video, tagging their friends. This gave me chills. Who is she? The way she plays with such emotion. I literally can't stop watching this. This is what real talent looks like. Someone had found her old competition videos and posted comparisons. Side-by-side footage of 19-year-old Claire playing at the International Young Performers Competition and current Claire playing at the restaurant. Same incredible talent 15 years later. Where has she been? Claire set her phone down, her hands shaking slightly. This was real. This was actually happening. What had felt surreal last night in the heat of the moment was now spreading across the internet, taking on a life of its own. By the time she got to work that afternoon, everything had changed. There was a line of people outside Romano's, actual people waiting to get into an Italian restaurant at 3 in the afternoon, hours before the dinner rush. Romano was standing at the entrance looking both thrilled and completely overwhelmed. "Claire, thank God," he said when he saw her. "We've had 200 calls today." 200. People asking when you're playing next, if they can make reservations, if they can take piano lessons from you. The phone has not stopped ringing. Inside the restaurant, the staff was buzzing with energy. Antonio grabbed her in a bear hug the moment she walked into the kitchen. "You're famous!" "Mi amiga, you're famous." The other servers crowded around, everyone talking at once, showing her their phones with different videos and posts and articles. A food blogger had written a piece titled, "The Greatest Performance I've Ever Witnessed Happened at an Italian Restaurant." A classical music website had published an article asking, "Whatever happened to Claire Bennett and why is she waiting tables?" The local news had called asking for an interview. "This is insane," Claire said, laughing but also feeling slightly panicked. "This is absolutely insane." Romano pulled her aside away from the excited crowd. "Claire, we need to talk. About last night, about what I offered. I want you to know I was completely serious. I talked to my accountant this morning, ran the numbers. We can afford to bring you on as our music director. You would coordinate all the entertainment, obviously play yourself several nights a week, and still have time for other opportunities that I'm guessing are going to come your way." Claire opened her mouth to respond, but Romano held up his hand. "Before you answer, there's someone here to see you. He's been waiting in my office for an hour." In Romano's small office sat a man in his 60s wearing an elegant suit. He stood when Claire entered, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Ms. Bennett, I'm David Park. I run the Sterling Conservatory's Adult Education and Professional Development Program. I had to come see you in person." Claire shook his hand, her mind racing. The Sterling Conservatory, the place she had left 15 years ago. "I'm not sure what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," David replied. "I just want you to know that we've been following your story since last night. What you did, the choice you made all those years ago to put your family first, that speaks to character. And the fact that you've maintained that level of skill after so long away from professional playing, that's extraordinary." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to complete your degree if you're interested. No strings attached. You could study part-time, work at your own pace. We also have a program where advanced students teach community classes. You could earn additional income that way while you figure out what you want to do next." Claire felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mr. Park, I'm 42 years old. I'm not some young prodigy anymore." "No," he agreed, "you're better. You're someone who has lived, who has made sacrifices, who understands what really matters. That comes through in your playing. Last night you weren't just technically proficient. You played with the kind of emotional depth that only comes from experience, from loss and love and struggle and survival. That's something you can't teach." After David left, Claire sat in Romano's office for a long time just thinking. Her phone kept buzzing with new messages, new opportunities. A recording studio in Nashville had reached out about producing an album. A wedding planner wanted to book her for high-end events. 3 different music schools wanted her to give master classes. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The scholarship fund that Richard had proposed became real. His firm had set it up officially, and after the story gained traction online, donations poured in from all over the country. People who had been moved by Claire's story, musicians who remembered struggling, parents who wanted to help talented kids have opportunities. Within a month, the Bennett Music Scholarship Fund had raised over $200,000. They would be able to help 15 students in the first year alone. Richard had asked Claire to be on the selection committee, and she had agreed on one condition: that the scholarships would specifically target students from working-class families, students who might otherwise have to choose between their education and supporting their loved ones. The first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old girl from a small town upstate. Her name was Jenny, and she played violin beautifully, but her family couldn't afford the tuition at any music school. When Claire called to tell her she had received the scholarship, the girl cried so hard she couldn't speak. Her mother got on the phone, her voice breaking with gratitude, and Claire found herself crying too. "Pay it forward," Claire told Jenny when they finally met in person. "That's all I ask. When you make it, when you're successful, remember this feeling and help someone else." Claire took Romano's offer, but they restructured it together. She would play Thursday through Saturday nights at the restaurant. The rest of the week, she would work on completing her degree and teaching community classes at the conservatory. She kept her server uniform, though. Once a month, she would wait tables at Romano's just like before. She never wanted to forget where she had come from or the people she had worked alongside. The first official night of her residency at Romano's, the restaurant was packed. Every table reserved, people standing in the back, some just wanting to be there for this moment. Claire wore a simple black dress instead of her uniform, but she made a point to greet all the servers before she sat down at the piano. Antonio had tears in his eyes again. "You did it," he said. "Look at you. You did it, we did it," Claire corrected him. "All of us. This whole weird, beautiful community we built here." As she sat at the piano bench that night looking out at the crowded restaurant, Claire thought about the journey that had brought her here. The choices she had made, the dreams she had deferred, the years of being invisible, and somehow impossibly finding her way back. She began to play, and this time it was different. Not because the audience was bigger or because she was being paid as a musician rather than a waitress. It was different because she was different. She had learned something important over these past 12 years. Something you couldn't learn in a conservatory or a competition. Music wasn't just about talent or training or recognition. It was about truth, about showing up fully as yourself wherever you were, whatever you were doing. She had been a musician when she was winning competitions, but she had also been a musician when she was waiting tables, when she was paying her father's medical bills, when she was putting everyone else's needs before her own. The music had never left her. It had just been waiting, patient and persistent for the right moment to emerge again. As her fingers moved across the keys, Claire caught sight of Richard at a corner table. He came every week now, always polite, always generous with the staff, always staying for her entire performance. He would never fully erase what he had done, and she didn't think he was trying to. But he was trying to be better, and that counted for something. Near the kitchen, she saw the rest of the waitstaff watching between serving tables. They smiled at her, and she smiled back. She would always be one of them, no matter what else happened in her career. That was part of her story too, and she wasn't ashamed of any of it. The final notes of her opening piece faded away, and the applause washed over her like a wave. But the best part was what came after. As the sound died down, Claire heard it clearly. From the kitchen, from the bar, from tables throughout the restaurant, people were calling out requests, asking questions, treating her not like some untouchable virtuoso on a stage, but like